Welcome, folks. We're going to get started here in a couple minutes, but welcome to the last session of the People's College. This is campaign strategy, and we'll give it a few minutes for folks to join. We are recording this session so that we can pop it on our YouTube. So if you don't want to be on camera, totally understand. Feel free to turn your camera off if that makes you feel more comfortable. But feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And say hi to all the folks on the call tonight, and we'll get started here in a few minutes. Welcome to everybody just joining. We're giving it a few minutes for folks to join. But go ahead and say hi in the chat. And we are recording tonight, so please try to stay muted unless we're doing a participatory kind of interactive part of this so that we reduce the background noise for the recording. And also, if you don't want to be on camera, go ahead and shut that off. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get started, but we can get started with some introductions. Hi, I'm Amy, she, her, and I'm the Volunteer and Jedi Director at 350 Colorado, and I'm also a board member at the Chinook Center. And I am one of your facilitators for tonight, and I will pass it over to Joe.
Hey everyone, I just put it in the chat, but I use he, him pronouns. I've been in the Springs for almost a year now, and I work mostly with the Springs branch of the DSA, trying to do some more environmentally minded things there. So looking forward to helping out. So I'll popcorn to Riley.
Hey everyone, I'm Riley and use she, her pronouns. I'm with 350 Colorado Springs and helping out with tech tonight. I'll pass it to John.
How's it going, everybody? I'm John Christiansen. He, him, or they, them pronouns are fine. I am with the Colorado Springs DSA, particularly the Labor Committee, and I'm also an executive board member of the Chinook Center. Also, Chinook or People's College is my baby. So thank you, everybody, for coming to this. And thank you, Amy, for putting this on tonight, ending on a bang.
Yes. And then our last facilitator for this evening is Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a volunteer with 350 Colorado Springs and working, sharing some slides today.
Awesome, thanks. So the Zoom logistics are here on this slide. If you do need closed captioning, it is available. If you click on the more button at the bottom of the screen, you can view and show subtitles down there. We are recording, so please keep yourself muted. We will share all the resources after. And I'd like to thank 350.org for this presentation template from the Power Up series. And some slides I stole from some other trainings I've done. And we'll go on to the next slide. We're going to start out tonight with a land acknowledgement. I invite everyone to acknowledge the land that you are on as we begin this session and important work. I would like to acknowledge that I, as well as probably everyone here, is on the traditional homeland of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes, and honor with gratitude the land and all of its inhabitants. When we talk about land, land is part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us. They're all around us, as you all do. Today, Indigenous people continue to protect and remain in relationship with these relatives, and will do so until the end of time. It is vital to honor these beginnings and recognize the ongoing dedication and importance of Indigenous culture within our communities and within the land that we gather, live, learn, and work on. It is important to understand the longstanding history that has brought you to reside on the land and seek to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context, as colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of present participation. Would also like to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women of the Pikes Peak region, two women who were recognized on May 5th on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day, Cherie Barker and Agnes Jerry Foland, holding space for their spirits and that they are returned home to our relatives. Next slide. So just an overview of what we're going to go through tonight. Campaign strategy. This is one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about some terms. We're going to talk about choosing a campaign, centering justice and equity, strategy and exercising our political power, and tactics. How do we move our decision makers? And then we will wrap up for the evening. So this is a slide for any of you who aren't part of one of these organizations, but I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is a part of at least one of them. But would like to thank the Chinook Center, especially for letting me do another session this year. Every year I do one since John started it, and I love doing People's College. It's one of my favorites. And thanks to Colorado Springs DSA for helping to facilitate tonight, as well as everyone from 350 Colorado Springs. So when we do share this resource out, be sure, if you don't follow us or we don't follow each other, to like each other's Facebook pages and to attend some other events. All right, let's dive in. So key terms, when we talk about campaign strategy and how to plan a campaign, there are 4 key things that we need when we do this. First, we need a vision. So what's a vision? It's what the world you are fighting for looks like. So that's your big overarching goal. And then your goal, your actual goal, is a specific outcome your campaign aims to achieve. Like, what are you trying to get to? The vision is the bigger one. The goal is actually trying to get through that path. Strategy is the overall plan of action to achieve your goals, and tactics are a special action you take to carry out your strategy. So what does that look like? So here we are. We're gonna use some metaphors. So what are our vision is to climb this mountain. We want to get to the top of this mountain. We want to climb Pikes Peak, if that's, we'll pretend this is Pikes Peak. So our goal, that's our vision, is to get there. Our goal is to climb. And then what is our strategy? Our strategy is the path. And our tactics are like our walking stick and our hiking boots. Next slide. All right. So once we have those things in mind, no, back to slide 8.
Sorry, I think it's a little laggy.
It's okay.
Oh God. Is
You guys don't want those?
Slide 8.
Is this it? No. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, got it. Okay, so campaign trajectory, what does that look like for us? So we start at point A, which is where we're at now. We have a vision of the world that we want to create. Visions are big, they're bold, they're transformative, they're radical. And then we have a goal. And our goal is our concrete thing, which we think our group can achieve to solve a problem. That pushes us closer to manifesting our vision. So on one hand, we need our goals to be informed by our vision, or else, we're doing small piecemeal reforms that don't really change the world. But we need goals that are concrete. Or else we're living with our head in the clouds. And then we have a line from point A to our goal. This is our path. This is our plan, our strategy, and our strategy has stepping stones along the way. And those are our tactics. So our tactics bring us to our short, mid, and long-term goals. So the movement needs leadership and experience at the grassroots in order to carry out effective campaigns. We cannot rely solely on national or international leadership. Campaigns build local capacity and local leadership in a very natural and decentralized way. With local victories comes increased confidence and readiness to take on more and more. So with experience, our groups grow smarter and more sophisticated with our decisions. Campaigns are also a radicalizing process, and this is the important part. People who get deep into one issue are likely to learn, not through at a book reading level, but like personal experience level, the ways the issues connect. So like when we're campaigning, like about local housing issues, for example, people naturally run into environmental, economic, and political issues also. And as local activists get smarter and more experienced, and we're less caught up in useless, political skirmishes or sidetracked by, negotiated settlements with our opposition, like except for like bargaining higher wages, things like that. But reflected upon experience creates wisdom, which is a pool that we will have to draw from like again and again. All right, so then I'm going to give you a sample campaign. And I want you to think about the 4 terms that we talked about earlier. So vision, goal, strategy, and tactics. So again, our vision is what the world looks like that we're fighting for. Our goal is our specific outcome our campaign aims to achieve. Our strategy is our plan of action to achieve those goals. And tactics are the actions we take to carry out our strategy. So here's our sample campaign. So 350 Colorado Springs was recently part of the coalition that secured the decommissioning of the Martin Drake coal plant. So now we're looking towards the future. Our Just Transition campaign hopes to ensure that the Drake plant is decommissioned in a just and equitable way. We will strive to advocate for the remediation and redevelopment of the site where Drake sits, ensuring that frontline community and impacted community members are brought to the table early and often. We will do our best to make sure the city of Colorado Springs does not gentrify the area hosting the neighborhood surrounding Drake. We will do this through engagement with the city and Colorado Springs utilities, lobbying city council and related government organizations involved in the process with meetings, letters, emails, postcards, and public comment. We will educate the community on what a just transition looks like and should be. We will rally our community around this issue and highlight it into the media to achieve our ultimate goal. So take a minute and think about what you heard in that when I was talking about that. You heard a vision, you heard goals, you heard strategy, and you heard tactics to get us to that ultimate vision of what we want the world to look like. So now we're going to do a fun activity. I don't know if y'all have used Menti before, but Riley is going to stop screen sharing for just a minute. And I will pop this. You can go to this link. You can click it through the chat, or you can like grab your phone and go to Google and just go to menti.com and then use the code, which I will also put into the chat. And then I will screen share and we're going to do a word cloud. So I want you to think of, you're going to type in 3 words that come to mind when you think of a just transition. So I'm going to share my screen, present mode. All right. So go to that link or go to menti.com and use the code that I put in the chat. And we're going to do a word cloud. So if you see when you click on the link, it goes here. So then you can enter the 3 words, or you can go to menti.com on your phone. More people are starting to pop in words. Awesome. I think everybody's participated. We don't have a ton of people on this call. So this is what this group, this is what comes to this group's mind when we think about a just transition. And I will save this and then send it out with our resources. And then I'm going to pop it over to Teresa to start talking about what is the right campaign.
Just checking. Hi, I'm Teresa, and we're going to talk about what's the right campaign. So the next one. So go to the next slide. So if our goal is to reduce climate change, what would be the first thing we'd start looking at? Well, we might want to adapt a climate action plan, or we might want to build more wind turbines because we need more renewable energy, or we can shut down Drake, a coal-fired power plant, or how about we vote out some climate deniers out of office, or save the forest, or improve public transportation, or get people to buy electric vehicles, or more sustainable agriculture. And then you can see there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities for things that we can do to reduce climate change. Climate change is a big issue, and there are lots to do. So how do we choose which one of these is right for our campaign, which one of these is right for our community, and one of these is right for our groups? So we need to do some research. We need to look at what the local issues are for our community. Fracking is a big issue, but it's probably not a good mix with our community because we don't have any fracking here. So we need to look at what's good for our community. Look at what other 350 campaigns are doing. What are other groups doing? We need to look at what things we can actually change. And then we need to choose and consider for whatever topic we're going to pick for our campaign. Make sure it has a climate impact, it's just and equitable, that we're likely to win. We don't want to pick something that we don't have the opportunity to win. That it builds the group and the movement, and it sets us up for the next goal. We also wanted to help build people within our group so that they grow and learn more about the climate, learn more about the issues, learn more about tactics and how to run a good campaign. So let's choose a campaign. Let's look at the next one. I think that's, is that 14?
I think Riley, I think we skipped one.
Yeah.
There we go.
So one of the ways that we can use is this tool. So to kind of explain it, the up and down is which things make more of a difference for climate change, more of a difference for the community, and which things on the bottom are not big issues for us. So you would pick things like Drake. Drake's a big issue. Coal-fired power plant is here. Something that might not be, or that we don't have, would be fossil fuels or fracking. And then we look at going on the horizontal, things that we're really good at, building capacity, what's our movement, and then things that we are not so good at. We want to make sure that we have the right resources. And resources are not just revenue, it's capacity, it is people, it's time. Can we get what we want done within the amount of time? And do we have the capability to make that movement go forward? So for items that are both big issues and that we're good at, we should go for it. Next one.
All right, so centering justice and equity. When we're thinking about justice and equity in our campaigns, we want to make sure we're centering that in a real, authentic way. So we want to use an equity filter when we're planning a campaign. And if you're not familiar with an equity filter, there is one that I will share. But there's a reason for engaging frontline communities. There's our sample equity filter. That's how we win on climate. Global warming is a crisis. We can't rely solely on environmental nonprofits to tackle it alone. By combining the resources of national organizations with experience and knowledge and those most impacted, low income, Black, Indigenous, people of color, we can build a diverse and powerful coalition for climate. But frontline communities and their leaders, especially those of color, have learned to be very wary of outside assistance because of the way that they've been treated by NGOs in the past. The most common criticism of nonprofits, and especially environmental nonprofits and foundations, is that they swoop down into communities to run an event or offer an insufficient grant, and then they swoop back out. The event or grant is offered on their terms, and the community is expected to be grateful. We can do better. Working with frontline communities requires a genuine partnership where the community leads. While residents have to lead the process, the environmental movement and its funders need to bring the knowledge and the resources. So by using an equity filter and by making sure who's at the table early and often first, not bringing them in to tokenize them, and who's not at the table that should be, and evaluating that. So here are some steps to help how to show up for frontline communities while you're running a campaign. You want to have a shared understanding. You want to put your values into action, especially, thinking about the values of justice and liberation that must be put into practice in our personal lives, as well as our professional lives. It isn't enough to simply unlearn oppression. You have to put that into practice. Take up less space. If you're a white person in the room, let other people speak first. Accomplices, not allies. Being accomplices means we're building beyond that allyship or those one-time events. Erasure is violence. Don't erase those most impacted from the work. Our contributions and knowledge is valuable. Equitable collaboration. A few people should not hold all the information and resources because this kind of creates an imbalance. So we want to make time to share skills and knowledge. Don't tokenize. Move beyond one-time donations. Be actively involved in fundraising efforts. And ensure that those most impacted are compensated for their expertise. They're not here to do a land acknowledgement for you. They're not here to do ceremony for you. They're not here for for people's entertainment. You need to compensate them for their time when they come and do speeches for you or trainings, whatever it is. Make sure that you're doing that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Those most impacted already know what they need. They've lived in this community for many, many years. Just because you don't see anyone doing it doesn't mean it isn't already happening. So do your research and listen, learn, and apologize. We don't expect anyone to be perfect ever, but we do expect folks to listen, learn, and apologize when we screw up, and we've all been there. And then I'm going to pass it back over to Teresa to talk about SMART goals. And we skipped one, Riley.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Okay, when you're picking goals, they need to be SMART goals. And what does that mean? Specific. Make sure your goals are focused and identify a tangible outcome. And without that, you run the risk of being too vague and not knowing when you're going to achieve it. Measurable. This is one of the ones that is really hard for climate change. It should have some clear definition of success. It's going to help us to evaluate progress. And because climate change is so long, you often have to have increments. So you set up by this time we need something to happen so that we will get to our goal later on at this rate. It has to be attainable. It should be a challenge, but it has to be reasonable to achieve. So relevant. This is about getting real and with yourself and ensuring that you're trying to achieve is worthwhile for you. Is it worthwhile for the climate? Is it worthwhile for the community? And time bound. This often goes with the measurable, especially for climate change. Every goal needs to have a target date, something that motivates us to and focuses us and gets us to go, yes, we need to close Drake by 2025 or whatever it is. So an example of how you put all these things together is that the Colorado Greenhouse Gas Reduction Roadmap, their goals are reducing greenhouse gases by 26% by 2050, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050. So they have measurable. They've done the research to know that they're attainable. They're relevant, they're for Colorado, they're very specific, and they're time bound. So that's an example of a SMART goal. So campaign strategies, how can you turn what you have, those are your assets, your people, your resources, your education, your skills, and your relationships into what you need. How do you enforce change? And in order to get what you want, your goals. Turning it back to Amy.
All right, power mapping. This is one of my favorites. I love power mapping. So power mapping is a visual tool used by social advocates to identify the best individuals to target to promote social change. Power mapping process, basically it entails the use of like a visual tool to kind of conceptualize the sphere of a person or group's influence. So you think about like, who are some key potential allies in your community, you know, individuals and organizations who are likely to be on your side and who have the ability to influence others. We want to think about who might oppose our plan and who is in the middle, who could be brought over to our side. And what are effective ways to communicate with your community. So when we think about like that, it sounds like a lot, but when we think about it, our questions are like, who has the power to fix the problem? And who do we have the power to influence? So we want to cut through all of that, you know, complexity and think about and focus our efforts on our target. So we're going to focus on a couple of tools throughout this training. We're going to start here with power mapping. Then we're going to talk about map of relationships and then spectrum of allies, which is super important. So, you know, you want to be clear about the goals of your campaign, and then you can get to your power mapping. So you figure out who the key decision maker or person or institution, you know, you want to influence to achieve that goal. And there can be more than one. Sometimes there is, you know, a few. So you want to brainstorm your community connections and start thinking about, you know, who these individuals or groups are connected to. And so on the next slide, we're going to talk about, so you draw a grid on a piece of paper. You know, horizontal with a vertical line. And you write on there, you know, this is what we want. So, you know, who has the power to achieve the goal, you know, here, and how aligned are they with our objectives? So, you know, this could be one person, if we like the mayor or the governor. Sometimes it's for us, especially here in the Springs, it's the city council. Or, you know, then we think about state legislator or less accountable decision makers like a corporate headquarters, an appointed public utilities commission, a school board. So who your target is and how much you can influence them should be part of the decision in taking on a specific campaign. So we want to think about, you know, the power, who has the power? We have the power to achieve this goal. Little or a lot? Do we have, you know, how aligned is this person with our objectives? Are they aligned just a little bit or are they aligned a lot? All right, so on the next one, all right, we're going to launch a quick poll before we do a little bit of power mapping of our own. Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. So take this poll. Who has anyone here ever done a power map? All right, see, this is an important topic because not a lot of folks have done a power map. All right, so we're going to end that, share the results. So see, 75% of us on this call have not done a power map. All right, so on the next slide, so Riley is going to take it out of present mode and she's just going to like leave it on her screen so that I can move these little stickies around. You can still share your screen, just not the in present mode. Okay. So when we're looking at our power map, so we're thinking about, we're gonna map out like these folks on our list. So like when we're thinking about a just transition from Drake, where do we think Colorado Springs Utilities, where do you think they go on here? You think they have, where do you think do we have the power to influence them, and do they the power to achieve the goal? So maybe we put them up here. What about, and somebody can come off mute, where do we think Mayor Suthers would be? You know, are they with, is he with us or against us? Anybody?
Seems like he's against, but also doesn't have that much influence.
Yeah, right. So we'll put him down here in this corner. And then we can think about our council members. Like if we think about like Richard Squirman, we have a lot of power to like influence him. So we put him, you know, I can't move this, sorry, I keep losing. So we have a lot of influence over him. So we'd move him over there. What about like Wayne Williams, who used to be the Secretary of State? How much power do we think we have to influence him?
Very little.
Very little. Exactly. So we're going to move him over here. And like another council member, like Murray, Bill Murray. Does anybody know about him? I'm going to put him kind of in the middle because he's a wild card. Bill doesn't ever do what you expect him to do. And he has like his own agenda, but he is very influenceable. Like you can definitely influence him. So I like to put him in the middle. You know, and then we think about like Yolanda. We know that we can definitely influence her and she is with us on our goal. So we would put her up here at the top. So see, once you have all these people, you map these people out, you go through your targets, you go through, you know, Colorado Springs Utilities, we go through our council, and you know, if we were going to do this more in depth, like a real power mapping, you know, this would take us a while. We'd name all of these and put every single person on council, especially the new folks who we don't really know yet. We need to get to know our new council members because we just had an election. So we have a whole different bag of, I don't even know, on council. So we need to get to know those folks. So this helps us figure out like, where are these people with the goal that we're trying to achieve? And how, you know, how are we going to influence them comes a little bit later. But once we figure out where they are and how movable we think they are, then we identify who is our primary target, who is our secondary target, who is our tertiary targets. And our tertiary targets influence our secondary targets. Our secondary targets are the people around the decision maker, and they influence that person. So we want to hit up all three of those. You know, when we were closing Drake, we knew that, you know, the utilities board and Colorado Springs Utilities, those were our top two targets. So we lobbied every single person we could. We showed up at every single public hearing, every single meeting about Drake for 4.5 years. We were there. We held protests. We did street theater. We did all kinds of crazy things, and we participated in the process so that we could influence these decision makers. And it took us a long time. Campaigns are not, you know, it's not like a 3 to 6 month winnable goal. Campaigns are usually, you know, they take years and they take a long time and they take a lot of dedication. But when you have all these things identified, you get into that goal and you know that, okay, you know, in a couple of years when there's another city council election while we're still working on this campaign, we're able to influence it more. Like we need to, you know, when we did this during the Drake campaign, we worked behind the scenes on getting more progressive people elected to city council so that we knew, you know, when this IRP process was coming up, that we would have more allies on council. And so that's how you really move your targets. It's a chess game. And so figuring out where these people sit is really important to getting to your ultimate goal. And I'm going to pass it back over to Teresa to talk about how we map out our relationships.
So let's map out the relationships, kind of continuing this. Go to the next one. So if we select a target And then we will look at what other people can influence each one of those targets, or if there's a group that can influence them. So let's try this out. Next one. Oh, or you take it, didn't know that one had one more visual. So if we're looking at CSU and the transition from as they close down Drake, the decommissioning and the reuse of that land, who are some of the other groups or people that can influence them? Well, we might look at utility employees. There are going to be employees who used to work at the coal-fired power plant who now have to know about renewable energy, and they're going to be wanting to be trained. You can look at city council allies and see which ones are for the transition and who's working on it. You can look at the developers who are going to redevelop that area and use them to influence Colorado Springs to make the right choices about that. And so as you go out further and further in this, you will see that there are more and more people that or groups that can influence who your target is. And you may end up working with a Democratic group because they will align with us on certain issues. You may look at some of the social justice issues or housing issues around that area as they're going to redevelop it. So there's just a lot that can go on. And so you will map out your relationships as you look at who you're trying to influence, who's your target, and how best to work through that. And after you've done your power map.
Cool. So far, we've practiced some power mapping to see, kind of where certain decision makers' interests lie and who we might be able to influence. We've also mapped out relationships of different groups of people to some of those potential decision makers. So now we need to basically figure out who all is on our side and could help us out in our goals. For that, we have what's called the spectrum of allies. So the spectrum of allies, if you were at John's session last week, you saw something generally similar to this, but the way it works, it's just a dial from the people most against you. Maybe they're the people that will fight tooth and nail against whatever goal it may be. In this case, I go to bat. Oh, shoot. John said, oh, no, my internet connection went out. Can everyone hear me? I guess just thumbs up if you can.
I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. What part did I cut out at? I wasn't sure how long I was at.
I mean, you were talking about people fighting against you, and then it kind of go.
Ah, dang. Okay. So our spectrum is going to run from the people that will actively fight against your campaign, and that turns over to the people that are most willing to support your campaign. And the whole purpose of this is to basically figure out where stakeholders are on this spectrum. So let's take a little bit of practice with this idea. And basically, let's think of stakeholders that would be invested in a just transition from the Drake plant. And when we think about stakeholders, we want to make sure that we're centering justice and equity. So we want to make sure that the stakeholders we're thinking about are people that will be most directly impacted by either getting the just transition or not getting a just transition. As an example of someone invested in maybe not having a just transition would be someone that maybe employs pipe fitters, right? They're probably going to be interested in having more oil. But go ahead and throw yourself on Stack, or you can post it in the chat, and let's just start coming up with ideas for the stakeholders that are affected. And Riley, if you want to take it off present mode so you can edit the stakeholders. And I guess you can still share your screen.
Sorry, I'm struggling. 1 sec.
You're good, you're good. Okay, so Mara said workers at the plant would be stakeholders. It's a great example. Thanks, Mara.
And I put Mill Street neighborhood. That's our frontline community.
Oh, cool.
Who else would be? Can anybody think of another stakeholder?
John said air breathers. Water drinkers.
Humans in general. Our CEO, I put down also our CEO of Springs Utilities. How about our developers? We know that they like to pillage the land. What about our unions? Anybody else got one?
Renters and homeowners nearby, depending on what happens to the land. Oh, city council.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one, Chauncey.
They do vote for it, and we're in a unique situation in Colorado Springs. Sorry to interrupt, Joe. Our utility company is municipally owned, which means that it is owned by us, by the ratepayers, and that is a very unique situation to have a municipally owned utility. And also, what is even more unique is that our city council doubles as our utility board. And that has been my argument for years, is that do these people who are elected to city council, do you think that they are qualified to run a multi-billion-dollar utility company? Not so much. Yeah, Switchback Stadium developers. Yeah, you think? That's a good one.
Oh, are they trying to build a stadium like in that area? Like after the plants shut down?
They're building it now, I believe, aren't they?
It's built, yeah.
Yeah.
There are
Oh,
events
wow.
there.
It's open and functioning. They're
Oh,
having
dang.
fun.
See how I haven't been downtown in a while.
Wow.
What about like the business?
And that whole area is targeted to be condos and hotels.
Mm.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to copy.
Okay, cool. So let's keep this going and try to place those shareholders one by one on our spectrum of allies. So again, you can either just post it in the chat or unmute. Let's start with the workers at the coal plant. Where are they going to be?
And with the context knowing that we have secured in writing from the CEO of Springs Utilities that absolutely no workers at the Drake coal plant or the other coal plant at Nixon, not a single person will lose their job. They will all be transitioned into other positions within the company or into their renewable energy program. So just some context on that when you think about where they would be on the spectrum of allies. So somebody want to pop in?
Hey, Justin here. Yeah, I'm thinking, I can imagine that a lot of them could be indifferent because work means work, but indifferent to maybe less than favorable. So maybe like 2 or 3 because people don't like unexpected change that's out of their control.
Good one. Exactly. All right.
What
So
about
Mill
our-
Street. So where do we think the Mill Street neighborhood would be? That's our frontline community. Anybody?
Looks like Tim has said 6 and Kevin 6 or 7 on the chat.
Awesome. Okay, we'll move that one over there. All right, what about the CEO of Springs Utilities? Does anybody, I mean, I know Ron personally, so I can speak to that one, but where do we think he is on a just transition? Okay, -11. Actually, the new CEO of Springs Utilities, his name is Aram Netanyahu, and he is actually a way better CEO than we had before. Like Jerry, who was the CEO of Springs Utilities when I first started this campaign, was a coal baron to his dark and black soul. He even wrote a book on coal in Colorado that he was very proud of. And then when Aram took over, that's when the tide turned. So I know we think the CEO of this particular utility company is going to be against us, but he's actually over here, probably a 4 or a 5, to be quite honest.
Wow.
Yeah, neat fact. What about humans who breathe air? We're gonna put them over here. Yep, 7. Off the charts. What about the developers?
I'd say against us.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a hard 0. What about city council? Like just like in general? Okay, 3 or a 4 from Tim. What about others have an opinion? Okay, we'll put them up here. What about our unions? And you know what? If we don't know the answer to this question when we're mapping our spectrum of allies, that's okay. We put them down at the bottom. Like I know a couple union opinions, like personal opinions, but I don't know what the union stance is on like this just transition. So it's okay to put them in the middle at the bottom and say, I don't know, and I need to find that out. It's our job as activists and organizers in our community to be able to recognize when we don't have all the information, we don't know everything. And I'm perfectly comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know, but let me find out. So maybe if we don't know, we put them down, down there at the bottom. What about renters and homeowners in the area? Where do we think they would be?
I also see that John said in the chat that developers near the plant would be with us. Can you speak more to that, John?
Yeah, for sure, John.
Well, all those people that are building apartments right there next, like right there in the southwest downtown, they don't want to sell apartments next to a power plant. They want to sell apartments next to parks and stadiums and museums. So those specifically would be, I think, people that would be interested in closing down the power plant, for example. And they have a lot of power.
Indeed. Yeah, so maybe we'll put like our stadium developers and we'll just change that to stadium and like housing developers. And we'll put them more over here, like closer to like our side of the spectrum. Okay, so once we figure out, this is like the, and sorry, Joe, you can take over. Me like steamroll your section.
Not to worry at all. So yeah, I mean, once we've identified where our allies lie in the spectrum, granted, this is something that, much like power mapping, we're going to do on a larger scale. If we were actually planning, right, we're going to really want to consider, every decision maker, every stakeholder that has a relationship with those decision makers, to really be able to identify some areas that we can actually work towards, right? And this helps us prioritize different parts of our strategy, right? Because if we look at these developers who we put at a 1, probably not going to be a great idea to invest a lot of time and energy into winning them over to our side, as if we would want to work with capitalists. But if we look at city council workers at the coal plant, they're gently against us. So that might be something that we could invest some time into and win them over. If you look at these people that are at like 4 or 5, maybe even pulling them further towards a 6 is something that can strengthen the movement. Okay, let's go to the next one. So we already mentioned the difference between strategy and tactics. Again, tactics being the individual action steps that build up towards the strategy. So Amy, I'm just going to hand it right back to you to talk about some of those pictures, because I imagine you could add quite a bit of context.
Yeah. So before we dive into these pictures, so when we think about this, we think about like activism is about using our power and our voice to make change. And organizing is about that too, but it's also about activating and empowering others. So it helps to think, in terms of groups, and successful movement building really hinges on being able to see a society in terms of specific blocks or networks, some of which are like institutions, like unions, churches, and schools, things like that. And others of which are like less visible or cohesive, like our youth subcultures and our demographic groupings. So after we analyze our spectrum of allies and we're starting to think about tactics and strategy, there is like one of my favorite stories is, just to put this into context, like how to put this into real life organizing, is like back in 1964, there was an organization called SNCC, and that's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And it was a huge driver of the civil rights movement in the US. They conducted a spectrum of ally style analysis while they were working on their strategy and their tactics. They determined that like they had a lot of passive allies who were students in the North, and these students were sympathetic, but they had no entry point into the movement. They didn't need to be educated or convinced, they needed an invitation to enter. And that's where our strategy and our tactics come in. So what they thought was to shift, their allies from passive to active. SNCC sent buses north to bring down folks to participate in the struggle under the banner called Freedom Summer. And students, they came in droves, and so many were deeply radicalized in the process. They witnessed lynchings, violent police abuse, and angry white mobs, all simply as a result of Black people trying to vote. And we have seen this play out in real life scenarios in the last year since the murder of George Floyd. So a ton of these kids, they wrote letters home to their parents, who suddenly had a personal connection to the struggle. So that triggered a whole other shift. Their families became the passive allies, and that often, bringing their workplaces and their social networks with them. So the students, they went back to school in the fall and they proceeded to organize on their campuses. More shift. The result was like a profound transformation of the political landscape in the United States. So that cascading shift of support, it's important to emphasize it wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a deliberate movement strategy that to this day, like we're talking about it here in a training, carries profound lessons for other movements. So, that's, in that case, their group was easier to reach. The rural folks made it more possible to mobilize a harder group, the city folks. So at other times, you might choose to reach out to the harder to mobilize groups first. So we have to remember in social, change campaigns, it's not necessary to win the active opponents over to our point of view, even if the opponent is the target. It's only necessary to move each wedge of the pie one step in our direction. So if we can make our passive allies become active and the neutrals become passive and the passive opponents act neutrally, that's how we win. And so that story to me is vastly important when we start thinking about strategy and tactics and what we're going to use to win our campaigns. So these are some of the things that we've done in the last few years. We all know that direct action gets the goods. This is a picture from our Colorado Springs climate strike a couple of years ago, organized by the youth at Palmer High School with our support. And it was an absolutely striking moment. This was moving that spectrum of allies. This was getting people to notice what was going on. And that youth movement, that climate strike movement, that has galvanized an entire generation of kids. So that, I'm a millennial, but like I have Gen Z kids. And a lot of the folks I organize with, and their generation is shifting the narrative completely. And then we get covered by the media, like quite often we write press releases. That's one of our tactics. We have media relationships that we're always reaching out to. We do direct action protests. This is a picture from one of our recent bank actions that we were participating in the Defund Line 3 campaign. But our campaigns and our protests go all the way back to DAPL. When we were locking down banks at Wells Fargo, people were getting arrested, massive uprisings downtown, all the things that we supported over the years, whether it's, climate related or not, we show up because we know that everything that we're organizing for in the climate crisis is intersectional with every other social justice issue. So this is another one of our tactics. We did a lot of street theater. And it was so much fun. This is a public hearing, this is a utility board meeting where we were fighting for more solar on the portfolio. And my best friend and I dressed up as a coal plant and a solar panel and had a sword fight in public hearing. We have art builds. And then the one previous to that we skipped is one of our youth organizers talking to the press and talking about why this is important to her and her generation. A press conference is vitally important to getting it out into the public, even though we know, don't ever read the comments when it hits the Facebook, KRDO or KTV, don't read the comments. But then testifying at public hearings is still important. I know that a lot of us, we think it doesn't help to engage in government. It's a rigged system, and it absolutely is. But we do have the power to make change locally. And that's where our fight has to start, is locally. And we were able to sway a local government in a deeply conservative area to decommission 2 coal plants. That is unheard of. If you would have asked me 5 years ago when I started this campaign, if I thought that we were going to win, I would have told you no, because I knew the political landscape here. But we did, we won. And it takes a long time, but the dedication has to be there. So when we're thinking about applying this to our campaign planning, we're thinking about, okay, what, and I think I have to pass it over. Yeah, I'm going to pass it back over to Joe to talk about what the right tactics are. But just when you think about that and after you do your mapping and all of those things, you start thinking about the tactics. And there's a resource online, and we'll share it down below in the resources slide, but it's called 198 Methods of NVDA. And it is my go-to resource when I am planning a campaign, because I go through it and I say, okay, at this point, if we've hit this goal, then we need to start employing these kind of tactics. And once we get closer, we employ these kind of tactics. So really having those resources available to help you while you're planning a campaign, and it helps to plan a campaign. Sometimes you just roll with it and it's like fly by the seat of your pants campaigning, and that's great too. But if you take the time and the effort to build the relationships, do the research, and get to this point where you're actually talking about tactics, you're halfway home. So I'll pass it back over to Joe to talk about what is the right tactic.
So when we're trying to figure out what tactics we need to use for a certain campaign, again, we have to emphasize the distinction between our tactics and our strategy. So as an example, if we are trying to raise awareness for winning electrification of buildings, right? Our strategy is the raising awareness and generating outrage about the health impacts of powering buildings and heating buildings with gas. Right? Our tactics could be, maybe we put on a panel press conference thing where we have doctors and nurses talk about some of the health impacts of that indoor pollution. And another tactic could be collecting postcards from affected communities, and those affected communities are calling for building electrification. Right, so these tactics are kind of like the stepping stones of your strategy to get from point A to point B. And so those tactics are going to depend entirely upon whoever we're targeting, right? If we found those people that are sitting right at the 3 in the spectrum of allies, maybe it's city council, right? Our tactics are going to have to depend on who we're actually trying to influence, as well as our group, our resources. What can we actually do with the resources we have? And then, of course, if you could, keep it on that one, thanks. So another important part is going to be sequencing your tactics in a way to maximize the effect, right? Because you can't just immediately have some big action and storm Wells Fargo and convince them to stop funding line 3 or any other number of pipelines, right? You have to start small and build those stepping stones in, and build your movement more gradually. Of course, be creative. You can't do the same action over and over and over. That's not really going to get a lot of attention, right? You can also, when you think creatively about your tactics, you can have the effect of 1,000-person protest with a few dozen people doing some creative prank that can just pull people's attention onto that. And then, of course, you have to make sure with all of your tactics that we're centering justice and equity. And if you're doing that before deciding your tactics, that kind of builds up the infrastructure to do that. And Amy says, make sure your tactics are elevating, not undercutting frontline communities. Thanks. Yeah, so like the postcards idea, that was something Amy put in the notes. Hearing from affected communities is really going to lend credibility towards those tactics. Okay, next one. Cool. So if we're looking at a specific tactic, right, we have to consider all of these certain parts. I believe this resource, the tactic star wheel thing, that's in the resource page at the very end of the slides. But we need to consider our target. Who are we actually trying to get a message to? Who are we making demands to? What message are we actually trying to get across? What is it going to mean to certain people on that spectrum of allies? You're going to have to craft a message that is consistent with what you're trying to get across. And that comes into the tone and the timing of it, right? So, is our tone going to match the message we're trying to get across? Do we want it to be angry? Do we want it to be calm? We need energy that will attract people that we want to engage with. And the timing, of course, we have to implement these tactics at the right time to be able to maximize the amount of leverage we can get. So certain current events happening can be a great trigger point for a certain tactic that maybe you otherwise wouldn't have employed. If we look at last summer, there were many events happening all throughout the summer that were acting as trigger points for certain tactics. And then, of course, our audience and our allies, who are we trying to get our message out to aside from those, the decision-making targets? Because in that audience, we can find some potential allies and maybe, like Amy said, sway the sort of neutral people over to passive support, maybe passive opposition to neutrality. And then finally, we have to consider our resources. That is basically the limiting factor of any tactic is going to be, how many people do we have? How many resources do we have to make signs and art? And even just time being a resource. Do we realistically have the time to plan this tactic? All righty. Okay, so we have this handy little image of a staircase, kind of mirroring what I was saying with the stepping stones of your strategy, right? So early on at the bottom step, those are going to be the tactics that are a little more simple and more based on just educating people, raising awareness about this issue, building your base. So whether this is a teach-in, some sort of speaking engagement, a film screening even, can be a good way to raise awareness. And then we start building a bit more of a base, and we're able to kind of go up the staircase here, right? So eventually maybe we can mobilize that base that we've built up, and it's enough people to hold a rally in front of City Hall. And then eventually build it enough, we might be able to meet with certain decision makers and power holders and be able to more directly ask for the change that we want to see. But of course, that's not always, that doesn't always work out the way that we want it to. But then we just continue to mobilize our base and keep applying pressure, right? If we don't let up that pressure, then it eventually forces those power holders into a bit of a lose-lose situation. I think, John, you mentioned this as well last week, but making a situation where the power holder looks bad regardless of what they do is basically the ideal, because that's the way to ultimately build up the most leverage and pressure. So this is where we start to see a lot more nonviolent direct action, NVDA, as it were. Go ahead and go to the next one, Riley. Sweet. Right, so basically what I've just talked about here would just be escalation, right? So starting small, starting with those maybe more educational tactics, right? Like just making a press release or, collecting information from an affected community and publishing that. And then gradually building up. Like I said, we can't just automatically just go right to the top, right? It has to start small. And really using each of those tactics to apply pressure in all of the right places. So go for it. Cool. And when we try to apply that pressure, we're going to want to look for a pressure point, right? Not necessarily acupuncture, but pressure point just being a place where if we put a little bit of pressure, whoever we're trying to influence might be a little weaker at that point. Right. So this is a way to use a person or company's like values, relationships, background, brand, to ultimately be able to just use that against them, right? And force a decision that we're looking for. And this is kind of what I mentioned earlier about forcing this decision, right? So if we look at a certain company, maybe they market themselves in a way that they claim to care about the environment, right? That's something that could be leveraged and really use the company's words against them. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Cool. So this escalation is not always going to be just a straight line. It's not going to be something that is just perfectly, just even, no problems, right? There's going to be certain times where not a whole lot happens, and then you'll get trigger points where some current event happens, and that's maybe a good time to implement one of your tactics. I think Lenin said something along the lines of like there's like years where nothing happens and then weeks where a lot happens. I totally misquoted that, but that's the idea, right? It's not going to be this smooth sailing. And those trigger points are going to allow you to do tactics that otherwise wouldn't really work. But the key to all of this, of course, is going to be organizing. Next one, please. Right. So, like I said, organizing is it kind of underpins all of these strategies, all of these tactics, right? So looking at the Just Transition campaign, right? The fossil fuel industry has a ton of money, right? But we have the people, right? So organizing is ultimately going to be what underpins these tactics and these strategies for nonviolent direct action, right? We have to build relationships and build solidarity to actually have people buy into working on a campaign, right? So there are a few different methods of nonviolent direct action, right? There's, of course, protests, rallies, marches, hanging banners, stuff like that. Intervention, this is a little bit more direct, doing something like an occupation, a sit-in, a die-in. That's something that is a very attention-grabbing action, right? Blockades, tree sits, stuff like that. And then non-cooperation, of course, that's Amy, do you want to talk a little more about intervention? That's your favorite.
I just had to comment on that because every time we read that slide, I get excited because intervention we see works, especially we can use the Line 3 campaign as a direct example of how this works. Like last week, a week before, Treaty People Gathering, where hundreds of people locked themselves to the equipment on the Line 3 work sites and shut down work for days. Intervention is by far one of the most effective tactics to get in the way. And that was the first time that we saw national media around Line 3, was when there were thousands of people out there and there was massive intervention. You've all seen like Greenpeace do the tree sits, like someone will sit in a tree in the way of a work, deforestation. They'll sit up there for weeks. And I'm particularly drawn to intervention just because It is, I mean, it's a high intensity situation and it's very escalated, and you have to be ready to put your body on the line. But that's where we, as the folks who are not on the front lines, you know, right now, we're not on the front lines of line 3, but that's where we can use our bodies to protect the front lines, to protect Indigenous communities. We go and we do those things because, you know, our souls are drawn to it, whatever, you know, your motivation is for it, but they work, you know, and especially tying that with all of these tactics, especially, you know, like the creative solutions one is another one that the Chinook Center does directly, mutual aid, like the People's Grocery on Sundays, and feeding our communities and taking care of needs directly that our system fails with. That's how we like meld all of these tactics together. When we do all of them, when we protest, when we do intervention, when we do non-cooperation, and then we bring in the mutual aid and community aspect of it, putting all those prongs together is that, I mean, that's a stick that brings you about to a serious win, you know, or some serious rests. But either way, you know, it always feels good to intervene in a system that is against us.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, that's, I think intervention, that's definitely the most like dramatic of the four. Like in, I don't know if y'all have heard about I think it's the Fairy Creek area in British Columbia. It's like the last old growth forest in Canada. It's about to get logged. Like people are doing tree sits and stuff. It's powerful. Cool. So I think you hit the other two, so you can just advance it, Riley. Okay, so the things we'll need to run an effective campaign. This is where we're starting to kind of sum up a little bit. So the research, making your timeline, assigning roles, your budget, and your messaging. Right. So this is going to be really important for your overall strategy. Is really kind of what's I guess that'd be front loading the work, right? Putting in the research and the thought beforehand, so that once you get to implementing some of those tactics, then it can unfold much more smoothly, rather than trying to backload the work. So of course, all of this coming in stages, with the escalating actions targeted at those decision makers to hopefully achieve your goal. But of course, it's not always going to go super smoothly. In fact, I would think there's something wrong if it's going 100% smoothly. You can go to the next one, Riley. There will always be obstacles in the way. And part of that just comes into anticipating any sort of, there's some sharp on there. Anticipating any sort of setbacks. And then of course, after an action is finished, build in some time to debrief. That's something that's really, really important. Getting everyone together afterwards. You want to do it shortly afterwards so that everything is fresh in people's mind, but you don't want to do it like right after something. You need people to have a chance to really reflect on the action. But just get together and just talk about, okay, what worked, what didn't work so well, and what can we do differently next time. That's a way that I like to do debriefs. It's just something, there's many different ways to do it, but it is really important to think about what you can do differently. Okay. And what questions do you have? You can throw yourself on Stack or post it in the chat, either way.
Hey guys, I've got a quick question here. So this refers to the spectrum of allies, and my question is, when we don't really know where a person or group sits on the spectrum of allies, how do we approach the problem of determining how to determine where they are? Yeah.
That's an excellent question. And one that you will encounter on any campaign. I've run into it many times. So I think the best thing, this is where research is key. We have the magical thing these days of Facebook stalking. So we know, like, we have a new council member and we don't know where they sit. Go stalk their Facebook, go stalk their Instagram, go stalk their Twitter. See what, pages they follow. Check out websites. You can, easily look at a company's website or a bank or, anything corporate. Everybody has a website these days. Everybody has, digital resources, and you can kind of get an idea from looking at those resources on where they sit on the spectrum. And then, if all of that fails, I always preach that one-on-ones are the building block of organizing and relationship building. So having a conversation with that person, and I've sat down with every single person on a past city council one-on-one and had conversations about, why don't you think this is important? Where are your values lie? And like, you figure out where their moral compass goes. And that's how you kind of help determine like where they are on the spectrum. And then, by building that relationship and having those one-on-ones, you can also figure out their trigger points and places where you're like, oh, okay, they just said something about, affordable housing and how they really believe in that. So that's a point that you can use to help move them on the spectrum. If you work that angle with them, like, oh, well, hey, if we work in, XYZ, in this, how we're going to transition from Drake, all your constituents who support you in affordable housing are going to be mighty pleased come election time. And you can also always look up where elected officials get their money and who donates to them. That'll tell you right away where they sit on issues. Like, you see certain, PACs and groups, right-wing groups or left-wing groups or whoever donating to their, to their PACs and to their campaign contributions. That'll help you determine that also. So there's many ways to figure out, where people sit on the spectrum. And relationship building is the #1 of organizing.
Right on, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Hey, I hope it's okay if I double dip. Oh, sorry, Tim, if you want to go, you can.
You
Right
and then Tim.
I appreciate it. So I guess, so I've lived in the Springs for 9 years, and I still to this day haven't really educated myself formally on how our government works, what our election structure is like, everything like that. What do you think is the best way to learn how this system works so that we can understand where to look when things change, like people in seats?
I can take this one if no one else wants to. Local elections here they're tricksy. It's a very unique system. And we know typically, actually statistically, that people are less likely to vote in local elections than they are in national elections. Like, that's just a fact. So the way the landscape here, you can go to the government pages, you can go to the city council pages, but the best way, honestly, that I learned through my years of activism is to participate in the system and to, get involved in the election cycle, find out when we're holding city council elections, who's up for their seat, things like that. So our city council, there are term limits on our city council, which is awesome, like high term limits. You don't get to be dictator for life. So, figuring out those systems, it's a lot of research and relationship building and kind of figuring out through campaign experience. And we stumbled a lot through Drake. Like, we would figure out, we thought someone was with us and then they weren't. And we figured out it was because the developers were donating to their campaign. And they have promised them things behind the scenes. So honestly, it's participating in the system. That's the best way to learn the local landscape. And get involved in an election. Like, go down to the Dems office. I know that a lot of us I know Tim's going to be happy I'm plugging this. As a person who was violently opposed to voting for a very long time, just because of our generation is so disenfranchised that, a lot of us, especially on the socialist, eco-anarchist end of the spectrum, we think our vote doesn't matter and who cares? This is a corrupt ass system anyway, left or right. I mean, it's true, but we we can preach that all we want to and, you know, be like, oh, the two-party system is shit. Like, no way I'm participating in this. But are you affecting change by doing that? No. You have to get involved in the system to change it from within. And I mean, that's the most important thing. So, I mean, I encourage everybody, regardless of your political affiliation, to work an election cycle. Go down to the Dems office, volunteer, help with a candidate. I have a good friend of mine, a couple of them who ran for office last year. I wrote postcards, I canvassed, I helped them fundraise, like, you know, all the things, you know, I speak at Dem events. And it's because we have to, if we're going to take our ideology of the perfect world and the most beautiful world that we want, we have to drag our two-party system kicking and screaming that way. So you have to participate. And I honestly, I've built some of the best relationships that have helped move targets and helped win campaigns by participating in the system. And the Dems down here in the Springs are honestly, they're some of the most wonderful folks. Like they're so great to work with, and their morals and their ideals are intact. And yes, sometimes we have to like bring them a little bit more left. But it eventually, like, I mean, that's what helped decommission 2 coal plants, was the support of the local Democratic Party. So you have to work within the system to change it.
And realize that, well, this group, no, Amy, I love you, you know.
Go, Tim.
And realize that this group has a more or less single focus. You come together over one kind of thing. And I'm here, but, and I'm far from being a standard Democrat. I was unaffiliated since 1990s, since Bill Clinton and NAFTA. Bernie came along, broke my heart. We ran Electra. We decided, what do we do now? Well, let's join the party and change it from the bottom up. And that is what has gone on with the local Democratic Party here. I have all the bitches about the national, and our state is pretty good too. You know, we made good strides there too. So Colorado's pretty rocking when it comes to Democrats. So I wouldn't let that hold you back. The damn the Democrats, damn the Republicans, they're all the same. I get it. Truthfully, on the national level, they are. But in your hometown, where your vote in a small election makes a hell of a lot of difference, and the little bit of help you can do is huge. That's how you start to feel power. That's how you start to feel empowered. How going to rallies and marches and things is great and all. I've been to plenty of them, but to be able to pick up the phone and call some of those people that you've worked for, say, hey man, I want to talk to you about this. That's good. It gets you entree. It gets you into people's phone books. And so come play with the Democrats. Here, they're great. I'm reaching out at this point. I've spent about 5 years with them, and we've got some new folks in there. They're great. I can endorse all the people we put in there. One of the reasons I'm attending this is time. Okay, do I have a little bit more space in my schedule? Can I reach out? Can I find some way to help out? Can I just be an interface, etc.? Hi, here's who I am. Call me. I'll see if I can do intros or anything like that. So good to see your faces on the Zoom, and thanks for letting me in. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We love you, Tim. You know it. All right. Well, we are at a little bit over time, so we're not going to go through the rest of the slides because it's just really wrap up stuff. But I will share the slide deck again in the chat. There is on the slide 47 at the very end, there are some amazing resources. Also, feel free. We are open source at 350. Like, take this slide deck, use it, make it your own, customize it for your group, and teach other people how to organize campaigns, because building people power and building this kind of knowledge sharing is the most important thing we can do in the movement. Opening those gates for people who don't have the knowledge and teaching our community members how to organize, that's how we win, especially in somewhere like Colorado Springs. So, I mean, there's like definitions, there's a strategy packet, there's tactics, you know, and stuff from Beautiful Trouble, which is one of my favorite organizations. They always have some really amazing things over there at Beautiful Trouble. There's an equity filter to use on your local campaigns. And you know, after this, if you liked what we talked about, and you want to support one of the organizations, whether it's DSA, Chinook, or 350, please donate when you can, or if you're able, share that in your networks, because we know we can't always organize on a dime. We need money sometimes to run these campaigns, and especially my heart and soul, the Chinook Center does the most amazing work in this community. John, thank you so much for letting us be in the People's College again. And I look forward to doing it again next session. And thank you to all of our presenters tonight, Teresa, Joe, Riley, thank you for the tech support. And thank you for showing up tonight, because showing up is the first step into engaging in the movement. So have a wonderful evening, and we will see you next time.